Hello. Good afternoon for you.
Hello, Maria.
Uh,
Yes, you want
so
to call? Yeah, go ahead.
to begin with, your name and where you are.
I am Felicia Carroll, and I am located right at this moment in Solvang, California.
And who are you as a person? Just to start with, in whatever way that makes sense for you. Who are you as a human being? Who is Felicia Carroll?
My goodness. That's the first question out. Who am I as a person? Well, a lot of different things, I'm sure. But I am a therapist, I would say. I define myself a lot as in that role as both a clinician and as a teacher. But I'm also an aunt and a sister. I am a woman. I am heterosexual. I am all of these kinds of things. I'm curious. I am creative. I have good friends. I hope I'm a good friend. I think I am. So my life is very, very full in those ways of how my family and my history and my gender, the time of history I'm living, have just made a tremendous impact on who I am as a person. I guess I could define myself as a progressive, as someone who wishes that we could do something different as human beings with the opportunity we've had to be on this planet. I'm proud when we do make choices that I think I agree with, that it would be helpful and meaningful to all of us. I love theater. I go to a lot of theater, live theater. So, I mean, it's just a very full kind of experience. So, yeah, that's who I am as a person as I think about it in this very moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what about some of your values? What would you consider would be your most cherished values or your most basic values? And how do you feel that you hold these values in your living?
Mm. You know, last night I saw a beautiful, not the traditional A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, but
I love
a
that one.
different variation, which was extraordinarily beautiful and well done and produced and acted. But there was a scene in there where they used a puppet to be Tiny Tim. And the way they had that puppet move was so tender and so loving and so gentle. And there were so many things expressed in that play that right now, as you ask that question, I just wanted people to see that play, because there was something about how we become who we are as children. And we have no say or choice. And we depend on growth and development to help us be the person we are. And I think when you ask me that, I go back to that moment. And I think one of the most important values that I hold is how important it is for us to know the significance of childhood and becoming human beings that love and that care and that are present and are cherished and cherishing. And whether that's, yes, a human child, but children across species and across planets and animals and all sorts of things. So what's my most enduring value? I think it just gets wrapped up in that, how significant that is and how that affects me as a person. It's every day when I look at the children and even the adults that I meet. I see myself very fortunate to work, especially with young children, but also with teenagers, these various stages of our lives when we're struggling to make sense, and oftentimes dealing with conditions that we have no control over.
Mm.
And so in one sense, I'm like a magician because I have to work with the field and change the field so that this child has an opportunity to grow in a direction that's going to help them be a person that will be of their choosing, more of their choosing, I guess I should say. If I have to whatever degree any of us makes a choice about who we are. I'm even working with a woman who's 85, and I don't think she knows my age at all, but we're working on her life narrative.
Mm.
And I'm aware of the fact that even at 85, there's so much of our life that we don't choose ourselves in terms of our bodies and how our bodies are going through its process of growth and development, and then old age and dying. And how we go through those stages needs support, needs understanding, and needs to be embraced. And so I think that's what I'm going on, but it's my greatest value. And I was really touched by the play last night of how they portray the tenderness of that, even in the realization, what they call the redemption of Scrooge, but how he came to see that value too was so important.
Mm.
So
That's lovely. Mm. What about an event? An event or maybe a set of circumstances that you find that have shaped your life or that have impacted you in a more significant way? And again, how did this event transform you and change you or impact you?
all I can tell you is there are so many. Want an event? Well,
Feel free. You can choose. You can choose a few.
On the theme of a childhood, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
I think my mother died a couple of years ago at the age of 94. But every Mother's Day that in my adulthood at least, I always told the same story. And that was my parents divorced really very young. They were 25 when they divorced, and they already had 4 children. So I was the eldest of those 4, and the youngest was a newborn baby. And my father was in the military, and so my mother essentially was a single mom at the age of 25 with 4 children, all under the age of 6 at the time. Well, the one event that I could tell you about that I remember that really had a real impact on my life was when my mother went into a clinical depression and was not really functioning very well. And I remember coming home once. I was then in 2nd grade, and I came home and everything was in total disarray and disorganized and everything. And as I walked in the door and listened to my toddler brother crying and my younger siblings, middle siblings, I don't know what it was just, and mother was on the couch asleep. I walked in the door, and I remember saying to myself, this is that unthought known, but I remember saying to myself, she can't do it. You're going to have to do it. But you being me.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of becoming that parentified, kind of pseudo effective, self-sufficient kind of kid. I was smart and I could do it. But the event I really want to tell you about was because mother was not really functioning very well, and the extended family could see she wasn't. some members of that extended family came one afternoon, and they were visiting with us, and I was sitting next to my mother, and she was holding my brother, who's the youngest. And at some point in the conversation, I remember they said to her, "You're not going to be able to raise these kids. I think you need to put them in an orphanage." We had orphanages then. And what I remember so distinctly, and this is what I always told on Mother's Day. My mother said at age 25 or so, 26 maybe by then, "I don't know how I'm going to do it or how we will do it, but we're staying together. We're staying together." And she did it. Every one of us went to college. You know, we're all one degree or another emotionally okay. But the courage that I saw in her, and the determination and the commitment I experienced from her over those years was extraordinary. And it was a heroine. She was heroic as far as I'm concerned. So because I know through the lives of children that I see, I know she made a big difference in that decision.
You followed in her footsteps a little bit, taking care of children.
I think so. I didn't have children of my own,
But
and
in caring for them.
yes, and my nieces and nephew, they've all been an integral part of my life. And then I think going into education, one of the reasons is that at the time I was making a decision about how a career or what I was going to do, there were very few careers open to women. And so I went into education. And because of my family, we were teachers. And so went into education, and that was what I did for many years. I was a classroom teacher, loved it, and seemed to be somewhat able to reach some of those children that other teachers couldn't reach in ways that were encouraging and supportive. And but maybe it was that attitude of, I don't know how we'll do this, but we'll do it, and we'll do it together.
So now I'd like to ask about a person, another human being who has impacted you as a human being. You just mentioned your mother. I don't know if you would like to mention anyone else. And the question is more how this person impacted you. I don't know, maybe you've answered that already.
Well, again, there's so many people that rush through my mind. I think I would be, again, it's a long story, right? But I suppose, I mean, I definitely need to say Violet Oaklander, in the sense of taking so much of my life and giving it focus and direction and purpose, from being a teacher to my experience of my own childhood. How she shaped that was first as a mentor, learning from her, and I had the good fortune of being an apprentice with her, not an intern. She had what she called an apprenticeship. And so I would travel from Santa Barbara, California to LA, where she lived and had her office at that time. And once a week, I would just shadow her, I guess is what we would say today. and then in the evening work with her in a group of adults. And I wasn't a member of the group. She allowed me to be like a co-therapist at that time. And so so that was so from there, the mentorship, the friendship that we just developed, the collegial relationship and support and developing, and the teaching and the training that I was able not only to participate in, but also to teach. And then the other way that she really shaped me was allowing me to teach internationally. And what I mean by that is that she got to a point where there was so many demands that she was not wanting or able to make all of them. But so she would recommend me. And that was the experience of my doing a lot of international traveling, first in Europe and Germany. And then I started teaching in Brazil, and then into Asia, and did some teaching in Africa, and
whereabouts in Africa?
And primarily Morocco, which was a very unique experience for me. But my first time in kind of an African Arabic country. And so the beautiful thing about teaching and traveling is that I get to know people from the area who are kind of my guides. They take me places and show me things. I see things with an eye that a tourist may not have. So that's always been something I've treasured about people who've been so generous and allowing me to experience things I might not have the resources to do otherwise. So yeah, that's always been with me, the experiences I had there. And I have a wonderful story to tell, but I won't.
Oh no, please. Please.
It was,
you can't leave wonderful stories out.
a wonderful story. Well, it was my Moroccan stories that you asked in particular about Africa. My greatest regret is that I haven't had the experiences of into even sub-Saharan Africa, which I'm hoping that will develop in the next few years. But right now, that it's been limited primarily. I got on the continent, I felt like Morocco. Well, anyway, here's the story. I was going from Morocco on into Germany. So I was going to catch a flight from Morocco to Germany. And so I was having to catch a flight, however, that left about 5 o'clock in the morning. And so I was going to have to leave. And I got up around 4 o'clock and for the first kind of call to prayer in early morning before even sunrise. And so I'm stepping outside waiting for this taxi that's going to be picking me up. And the organizers of the training event had arranged for me to have this taxi. So I was okay. I felt okay going that early in the morning to the airport. And but as I was waiting by this amazing pool of water, all of a sudden the museum made the sound of the call to prayer, call to prayer went out. The birds, the donkeys, the dogs, it was like the heavens opened up. And I just was there in awe of how magnificent that was in the night sky, which was still dark, and just to have that exquisite experience of all of the life just coming together in that moment. It was quite a resonance, I would say.
Well, like an almost palpable feel of the field.
Yes. I mean, it was vibrating. It was sound. It was music. It was visual. I'll never forget that.
That's nice. Mm. Um, so how do you experience or how do you live your gender?
Oh, you know, gender and is such a it's something that's so being brought to our consciousness and our awareness. It's not just a part of the ground anymore. It's almost figure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And the questions I deal with adolescents about who I am and
mm-hmm,
within the whole spectrum now of LGBTQ, issues
mm-hmm,
and identity. And how I live, being what I know to be female, is pretty much culturally determined. I can, it's, and at the same time, I was a young woman, an adolescent and a young woman during the period of the feminist movement in the United States.
mm-hmm,
And so that really determined attitude changes from dependency kinds of issues to independence to interdependency,
mm-hmm,
working with rather than feeling separate in so many ways in our gender issues. So I live it out and all the kinds of things that I enjoy in my relationships with men and women, just loving and caring and being friends. As a heterosexual, I find men very attractive this way and enjoy gossiping with women about men, about what's going on. I also enjoy kind of watching the maleness and femaleness of the children that I work with from my perspective, and sometimes wonder what it would be like if they had a male therapist, if that would be different for them.
mm-hmm,
And how so much of what we see is gender determined to a great extent, and how we interpret experience. So how I live it out, I hope, is with graciousness and love and inclusivity and and actually I've thought about this, this is another one of those things like I didn't choose my gender. you know, I don't even know what that means to say that, to tell you the truth, but who this I is that says I did not choose. But it's amazing to me how much of who this person is shaped by the way we define gender and what gender means and how we're supposed to act that out and carry that out.
mm-hmm.
It's not something that's very clear, but over the years, my body has really informed me that I'm female. so, so I celebrate that and
Mm-hmm.
have enjoyed it. I do enjoy
What about your age? How are you experiencing your age in this moment, in this moment in your life? I hear now.
it. Well, again, it's one of those things. Again, it's culturally shaped,
Mm-hmm.
definitely culturally shaped, even though biologically the trajectory is uniform throughout the world as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
So aging, well, I guess we have to have it, don't we? I'm one of those that just says, I think longevity is overrated. It's a time of life that I think every time of life needs a lot of support, and we need to understand what's happening to us. I don't sometimes understand, and I don't like what's happening. So how
Mm-hmm.
I'm dealing with my age, is sometimes with a lot of rage.
Mm.
Like, this is such a nuisance to deal with. That being that my age,
Mm.
but I'm reading a wonderful book called the Wisdom Paradox, and it's about the aging brain. And
I don't
actually,
know that one. Who's that? Well, I'll get it when I'll get
well,
the
it's
when we're
by
done.
Goldberg is his last name, and the first name is Elkhornon. I'm not sure how to ELKONON,
Well, yeah.
Goldberg,
Mhm.
who is a brilliant neuroscientist. I'm really enjoying studying with him through webinars and through his writings. But he's
Mhm.
wrote a book called The Wisdom Paradox, and it's about the
Mhm.
aging brain and how the
Mhm.
brain actually changes in some ways for the worst, in some ways for the better.
Mhm.
And one of the ways that we begin to change for the better is wisdom is what we gain through the experiences that we've had in life. And it's how the right brain, but of course to have both. But it's like Ian McGilchrist, the
Yeah.
wisdom master and the emissary. So the
Mhm.
master gains this wisdom
Mhm.
that has been collaborated with the emissary and the things that we know, the practices that we have. We don't have to think so much about all of those things anymore. They're
Mhm.
there. And so the wisdom we have to pass on to that we hold. And I'm kind of becoming more aware of that in myself,
Mhm.
even clinically. Um, Sometimes I wonder, where did I get how do I get that kind of boldness or that sense of I can make this statement as if I'm speaking truth? It's how, and yet there's a way of being with people at an older age that seems to be welcome and has something to offer, and it's
Mhm.
received. It's received. Yeah, it is. Um, Even maybe in a way that's like grandparents. You can hear your grandparents in a way you can't hear your parents, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And there's something about our sages and our elders that we don't really, maybe we don't prize, but we do within the family. The family begins to prize. I prized my mother as she got over, 94, just
Mhm.
um, that collection of things that she created for us. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question or not. I'm just
Yeah.
kind of free associating here, but I really recommend the book, the
Mhm.
wisdom.
Yeah. I look for that. Mhm. Yeah,
The
when you talk of brain and you mentioned McGilchrist,
Yeah,
I get the idea of the right brain, but I always get an image of wisdom as integration, a
well,
more developed integration that you will get with age, but if you do good work in your life.
I think that,
Yeah,
and for me, I
yeah,
think I'm able to bring together so many different life experiences
yeah. Mm,
are integrated, that are
mm,
at least that's my experience,
mm,
that and I guess another thing about being older is perspective. um I guess that's part of wisdom. What I mean by perspective has to do with a perspective of time that sometimes we're more aware of because we're looking at less time than what we're looking back against. And if we
mm,
use what we're looking back against, the years of all of that, as we integrate those experiences, we've learned a lot. And when you sit with other people who are in the process of learning those things, how do you support and allow them to make sense of their experience too? It's
mm.
when they're 5 years old.
Yeah. Um, okay. What about privilege and power? The question would be, how do you experience privilege and power in your existence, in your life?
Say that I missed a word in it. In my what?
How do you experience
Yeah.
privilege and power in your life, in your living, in your own experience?
Oh, my experience of my life. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, again, I have to go back to some of my theater experiences, but I don't know why, because we see it every day. I was born an American, white American, even though female white American, a privileged position in
Mhm.
how we look at world cultures, or
Mhm.
even, I guess, our own ethnocentric kind of sense that, you know, Americans are privileged. Yes.
Mhm.
I remember my first experience in Italy, um, when I really realized that not everyone has the same experience or same feelings or regard for Americans, that, you know, I was sitting at the table
Yeah.
conversation. I remember that sense of, whoa, I had, it was like, this was very important for me to pay attention to, because I had, kind of experience outside of my own culture where people were being very critical of who I was essentially as an American citizen. So privilege that way.
Mhm.
Um, and, but I also know the other side of it, because my family grew up a single woman raising 4 children. We were not
Mhm.
privileged economically,
Mhm. Mhm.
quite the contrary. And I remember, what it means not to have shoes. We didn't, we only wore shoes to school and into church. But other than that, you were barefoot, because you had to shave your shoes, and, just we ate, but anyway, it was not affluent or even close
Mhm.
to. We were on the other side of the tracks where I grew up.
Mhm.
I know the other side of economic privilege, but the other, I had to learn over the years, growing up in a segregated society. Oh, and in the history of civil rights, I was a young woman, and as a teacher, I was one of 5 teachers selected to integrate the Oklahoma City school, to desegregate the Oklahoma City schools.
Wow.
The schools there, the school district decided before they integrated student bodies, they would integrate faculties. So I had the experience of working in one of 2 white teachers in an all African American Black school. And again, learning about privilege and power. Where in that school, I was a teacher, I had that degree of power, but I didn't have anything else. I depended on my colleagues, my Black colleagues, to support me, protect me, and sometimes even to intervene on my behalf. But one of those teachers became one of those persons that really shaped my life.
Mhm.
That was the school librarian,
Oh.
Lily Jones. I'll never forget her. But so I came to understand over the years, from personal experience, but also from my political involvement. I've been very politically involved most of my adult life. And so I've come to understand it that way. And as a woman, again, going through the changes that were made in American society towards power and privilege for women, and how I embrace that, and how we're still working on all of that throughout all of these cultures, right? Throughout the world right now,
Yeah,
as women.
around the world.
So personally, right now, I'm I guess I'm just enjoying the power of, like we were talking about before, that sense of wisdom and being able to teach and to write and maybe having something to say.
Mm.
And right now I'm struggling with, what do I have to say that others have not already said about therapy with children, about Gestalt therapy with children? What is it? And I'm now working on 2 different chapters for 2 different books, and I'm still struggling. What am I saying that is a contribution? But that comes from the power of being able to sit back and think about, what have I learned? What maybe what I've learned might be helpful to somebody else.
Um, okay, so now we go into Gestalt. How did you make your first contact? How was your very first meeting with Gestalt therapy?
I love these broad questions that have big answers.
But this is a more specific, like your very first,
Okay,
like
my
how did
very
it pop up in your life? Like, oh yeah, we'll get into why you loved it and you liked
okay,
it.
all right.
This is just
Okay,
like
so
the
we're back.
box.
We're
Yeah.
going back now to Lillian Jones.
Mm,
And when I was teaching in this all Black faculty and school students, which I absolutely, I felt like it was one of the most important experiences of my life too. Anyway, Lillian one day brought me a book. And she said, yeah, I told you she's the school librarian. So she brings me a book. We just got this book in. And as I'm looking at it, she said, Felicia, I think you're the one person on this faculty that I think would be interested in this book. Well, the book was Values in Teaching. And that book came out in the 60s, and it was part of the humanistic education movement in the United States, where there was more integration of emotions and values and how decision making and problem solving and teamwork, as well as the academics, and how we could integrate, how you could teach history and English and all together, and teach science and math together as you're integrating disciplines. And that's what we were working on. Of course, all of that changed when we went back to basics, and they threw out all of that. No, we got to get the basics down. So anyway, that's I digress there with that. But anyway, so Lillian gave me this book. It's Values in Teaching by Sid Simon, Lewis Raths, and Merrill Harmon. And I read it and was inspired by this book and started integrating a lot of the principles in with my teaching. Well, then I decided that I wanted to go back and get a master's degree, which I did. But at the University of Oklahoma, there was no such thing as humanistic education. But my professor said, okay, you in your electives, we'll let you choose courses, or we'll give you credit for seminars and workshops that you go to as part of your elective program. Whoa, I mean, that was pretty cool. So I started exploring more of humanistic education and discovered that there were 2 programs in the United States that had graduate programs in what could be called humanistic education. One was on the East Coast, University of Massachusetts, where Sid Simon taught and where they wrote Values in Teaching. And on the West Coast was George Brown and his program in confluent education at the University of California, Santa Barbara. George Brown was a Gestalt therapist, and his program was based on Gestalt principles of Gestalt therapy and confluent education. And the department, it was confluent education. And I chose to come to the West Coast and begin my studies with George Brown. But before, I had to establish residency in California in order to be able to afford to do that. I had the good fortune and the good sense to go to Esalen Institute, where I then began working with Fritz Perls died in I believe.
Yeah, I was about to ask
1970.
what year was this?
I think it was, well, he died in 71, and I went to Esalen in 76, 77, and was there until Janet Letterman, who wrote the first book in Gestalt therapy with children. She died in 1992. So and my story of Esalen is another story. But anyway, so I met Janet Letterman. I read her book. I lived in Fritz Perls' house for a period of time. At Esalen, it wasn't, talking about theory and all those kinds of things was still kind of, if I can say it, BS elephant shit. So there wasn't a whole lot of that, but there was a lot of practice and the experiential piece. And Janet had developed the school there. It was a preschool for infants up to age 5. And she invited me to join the faculty there at Esalen, at the gazebo at that school. So through Janet, George Brown at the University of California, where I eventually went, and I went into therapy with George Brown's wife, Judith Brown, when I first arrived there in Santa Barbara. And from there, and then I met Violet. So my first inkling of Gestalt therapy, I don't know, maybe with Lillian Jones and the giving me that book, which just started the journey of my looking into what this whole world of humanistic education and psychotherapy was all about. And so that's how one thing leads to another.
And what about Gestalt attracted you? What was it in Gestalt therapy that you looked at it? Yeah, that's what I want. This makes sense for me. I wanna do this. I want to learn more about it.
Mm-hmm. My graduate program at the University of Oklahoma is in educational psychology, and it was a behavioral program, and I'm really grateful that I actually had that background, especially a kind of a cognitive behavioral orientation. And so that's why it was so remarkable that they let me go into the humanistic education the way that they did. Once I was teaching and looking at what this book, Values in Teaching, and then Janet's book with children, I understood that there was more to our experience, especially with education and growth and development, than just a cognitive behavioral program, which seemed not alive to me. So what stood out for me was the aliveness, the creativity, also the embodied approach. It was a fullness. It wasn't just shaping behavior, contingency management and all of that. It had to do more with the whole person. And that is what really appealed to me. It meant a lot to me personally. I talk about Esalen as my crucible, where I actually became a person, a wholeness, rather than that parentified child who became a teacher because that's the only thing women could be, into really becoming a whole kind of sexual, sensual, emotional kind of human being. And it kind of brought all of those kinds of pieces together for me. And to do that in the scope of working with children and living and being with other adults was extraordinary. And so I think it was that's just that sense of aliveness and creativity and the fullness of being a human being, not just one piece of it. And we're shaping behavior, changing behavior. It just seems so rigid and niggly. It just still does. Yeah.
So that's a question more about your work. What do you do with Gestalt therapy? How do you use it? Or more broadly, if whatever you do that may go outside of Gestalt, basically, what's the essence of your work? What do you do? Therapy wise, I don't know if you teach,
Well,
stuff.
I think even though I have I work with adult clients, but my specialization and what I want to talk about and what I do my teaching and writing about is Gestalt therapy with children. And I guess you can tell from this interview, children have been a part of my life from the get-go. So what do I do as a Gestalt therapist? Well, I've been strongly influenced, as you know, by the work of Violet Oaklander. And I've also have found it's been important over these at least the last decade or 20 years or so. What is this? Since the 20s, to the integration of everything that we're learning about how we grow neurologically, how we grow in relationships, the growth even in Gestalt therapy into something we talk more relationally, field orientation, seeing ourselves within the field, and we're moving out of that kind of individualistic, just seeing the individual isolated, if I can say that as a general thing, but isolated from the world around them. And so that part of psychology and psychotherapy that really recognizes, and Gestalt does that in a way I don't know of anyone else who does it as well as we do in that regard. So in my work with children is first and foremost to look at the child and even the adult developmentally within a field conditions, the situation of their life, we might say. How is this organism that's 5 years old, 10 years old, 14 years old, how organismically what's happening to this child, neurologically what's happening, as well as how is the environment, the familial situation the child is in, that configuration. How is all of this creating the pattern internally? How's the child organizing that, which is what Fritz Perls said. Gestalt is just that organizing principle that we bring to our total experience as an individual organism, how we develop a sense of self that perpetuates, it goes on to develop itself, kind of takes its own energy on, and the one thing leads to another. So I'm very much interested in that. And so my work becomes very much not only working with the child, but also working to how the child has adapted and created these patterns of being, but how the field is influencing that and what needs to happen to bring those two things in some kind of, what do you call that? Some kind of coherence, some kind of harmony, a balance of needs and of all the various individuals in that system. Parents have needs individually and as a couple, and all the shapes of families, all the things we've talked about here. So I try to integrate in the teaching what I think is Gestalt therapy that incorporates all of that.
Mhm.
And I go beyond some of the traditional. I continuously study the traditional Gestalt therapy, the traditional literature, and
Mhm.
go beyond. And I'm excited by what I'm reading, what other people are doing, and how, in so many ways, there's really a lot of, um, well, Dan Siegel would say consilience, where we're in so many different fields of study and therapeutic approaches, we're discovering the same principles.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer, maybe it's because I'm a Gestalt therapist, but I think that Gestalt therapy can offer us that unifying theory that
Mm.
the field needs. Okay. So what I offer that's, I think, unique, I've discovered over the years, and I do workshops and trainings on the essentialness of providing a life and or trauma narrative, or even writing about a certain situation in a child's life that they need to, that feels incomplete,
Mm.
that they're not able to complete, to make sense of, in a way that outside of the various creative adjustments and the ways that we make sense of things that may or may not support the ongoing development of the individual.
Mhm.
So through neuroscience, through the years of working, even at Maslow said one of the essential needs we have as human beings is a narrative, a lot, the narrative of our
Mhm.
lives. Irv Polster wrote the book Every Person's Life is Worth a Novel.
I love that one. We don't have that one translated yet. Just the title is just perfect. I love
I
that one.
know, I know. Well,
Just
I'm in the
perfect.
process of writing a book with Irv's permission.
Mm.
I've adapted his title. And I'm standing on good big shoulders because Laura Pearl's adapted Polster's title. He wrote Every Person's Life is Worth a Novel, and she
Mhm.
changed it to a lecture she gave called Every Novel is a Case Study.
Oh, I don't know that one. Yeah, I
It's
have
a
to
good
write it.
lecture.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I have to write it.
I could send it to you if you want to see it.
Mm.
So when I started writing, and I was getting ready to give a workshop, and I was wanting to call it Every Child's Life is Worth a Story.
Mm.
And so I called Irv and I asked him if I could change his title to Every Child's Life is Worth a Story. And he was, of course, as lovely as he always is, and said, of course, and I love it, and do it, that kind of thing. So what I have done is created a way of working that is respectful of all these various elements I was just talking about in terms of the field and the child, and creating meaning and completing situations in a way that allows you to go forward in a more integrative way. I've created what we call these workshops on Every Child's Life is Worth a Story, and how I've integrated the work from my Ericksonian colleague, Joyce Mills, who has written about therapeutic metaphors and the elements of therapeutic metaphor stories. And so we use these same elements in writing the life narrative, which when you look at Irv's book on Every Person's Life is Worth a Novel, it's the same elements right there. And great literature has all of the same elements. And I use, sometimes in the workshops, we use the Star Wars stories, which has the same elements of great stories. So literature, our lives are literature, right? Can be literature. It is literature. It's a story that's unfolding. It has its problems, its conflicts, and how we resolve all of those stages of development and so forth is so essential to us having this integrated life that we then can call wisdom, like you were saying. And we have something to give back as we have overcome those things. But we need support in the process of doing that. And so many children don't have it, or they have support that's demeaning or shaming, or gives them the sense they're not worth it, or they're not capable. And that's what most of us are dealing with in therapy as adults anyway.
Yeah.
And And that's why Herb says
Yeah.
every person's life is worth a novel. Well, every child also has their life is worth a good, and it is a good story. So I've written about everything from children who, or a child whose parent, they have a parent who's mentally ill, to the death of a parent, of course, to automobile accidents that happen, to sexual abuse, other forms of trauma, parents who have drug or alcohol problems. Anyway, just all sorts of situations in a life that that's important for them to have. And the difference is that rather than just telling it or talking about it, it's written, and it's written as a book, and the child gets the book. And parents or others in their lives can contribute pictures, photographs. The children sometimes draw their own pictures. We can use clip art as we illustrate these books, but they get a book and I hand it to them, and it's their book. And over the years, I have been told over and over again of how meaningful, and how often the child or even a teenager will say, I still read that book about my dad. And it's always meaningful to go back and read that and have that story. So that's my contribution through the workshops that I do. And I'm hoping to begin to do some writing about that. And it's kind of hard to find that in a very busy life, you find time for writing. So anyway.
Okay. How would you say Gestalt therapy has affected you as a person? Maybe you said this already when you talked about what attracted you to it. I don't know if there's anything else you might add.
Well, I think probably more than just about any other therapy, as I said, my experience as a client, and I've had some beautiful therapists over the years, beautiful human beings, that's what I mean, who walk the talk. They lived it.
That is
And
not easy in Gestalt therapy.
no, it's not, but but again, it has been one of those things that's helped me, that it's that wholeness, that aliveness, being supported in my own creativity and my own vitality. The all the various ways of being a human, embodied and female, sexual, being intellectual, and being able to move in those directions, being supported, being loved. I think I feel like I'm a person in Gestalt therapy, and I've discovered that, not being treated as an object or out there, an objective other. I feel that I've been embraced as, and the word that I learned from one of my therapists was that I incorporate and just try to incorporate in just almost everything I do. My mother used the word, and this therapist did, and that is what we are going to do together here. What we're going to do together. Not the language of what you are going to do, but what we will do here together. So what I say to children is, what, let's see what we do together here. That to me is, as we together discover who we are in this moment of time, and I don't have to have all the answers or know what we're going to do together, but we'll find it. And so I think that's, to me, that's what I incorporated into myself. It's just the fullness of being.
Do you feel like you belong or you're part of a Gestalt community?
Yes. There's the immediate, like, like I have an extended family and of Gestalt colleagues over the years, and I still feel those are individuals I could go to. And
Mhm,
I'm actually thinking about reaching out to some of them with support for writing. I'm
mm,
feeling the need for support with that. Um, but so that in that sense, I am a part of a Gestalt community. And then I have the more immediate, the people that I work with and through the institute that I do training through, the West Coast Institute for Gestalt Therapy with Children and Adolescents. And I have my colleagues through there that are more kind of what you'd say, like your family you get up in the morning and you have breakfast with. but but I definitely feel part of a community.
um, would you be able to identify a more challenging moment for you related to Gestalt? Mm, challenging really is a word. Mm, not necessarily difficult, but a challenging moment that you can remember.
I'm not really sure what you're asking. A challenging moment as a Gestalt therapist or maybe
Related
just
to Gestalt in any way, as a therapist, as a trainee, as a client. You know?
um I think one of the most challenging moments that I've had as a Gestalt therapist um, um, had to do with saying goodbye, allowing closure with a little girl that I had known since she was about 5 years old. And her life story is um, maybe I felt her life story, and maybe, in terms of the counter transference through my own life story. Um, uh, it was very difficult to say goodbye. And I found myself, I could feel that in myself, that I knew I didn't want to say goodbye or have closure. And even the thought of it just brought on immense grief for me. And the person that I reached out to after about struggling with this for a year, knowing that she needed to move on, was her mother. It was her adoptive mother because she had been adopted. And we had written this little girl's life narrative together, and had many different kinds of clinical experiences together. And she, to this day, is just an amazing young woman. She's now a teenager, graduating from high school, I think, this year. But the feeling that I had, there's the story of a Navajo story of how a grandmother is weaving the death rug, and which is traditional, that when the elder person knows or senses their time is near, they would start weaving the death rug, the rug that they would be wrapped in in their burial. And the little girl in the story recognizes what her grandmother is doing. And every night she would get up and she would go to the rug where her grandmother had been working, and she would pull the threads out. And so that the rug would never be completed. And when the grandmother realized what the little girl was doing, she told her how everything has to come to an end. So there's a story about accepting the endings. And
Mm,
I felt like that little girl in my therapy with this child. And I knew that this was my issue. And I was having all of these kinds of different emotions that I was not was cautious and careful with my own awareness of my feelings and my emotions, and knew that I was not holding on and making her mine and doing all those kinds of things. So I sat down with her mother and I told her, I said, I'm having a hard time saying goodbye. And I'm just needing your support. And her adopted mother obviously was a very mature person, and I felt she could hear me as we had come to know each other, and I knew she could hear me. And she said, you know, I'm not so sure I'm ready for you to say goodbye either. And she said, I'd like for us to continue coming for until the end of this school year. And I said, oh, that sounds good to me. So the mother and I had this agreement and this plan. And so that is what we did. And with her support and my awareness, and we had a little gathering of the families, the adoptive family, and she with her siblings, all of whom had been adopted, and myself. And it was a beautiful closure of that one session. And so what was so wonderful is that recently, I guess about 2 years ago, she was 16 at that time, and her mother called and said she'd like to come in and see you. And so she did, and it gave me a chance to see what a beautiful young woman she's becoming. And it's also that way as a therapist, that learning how significant that feeling of love, that feeling of connection, that feeling of prizing each child, you know, who is there, without, but in a different way, from a parent, you know, who is there. I have to be different. And so that was a beautiful moment. And then this weekend, I just went to the high school play, and she was one of the crew, the stage management crew in that play. But there were 2 other former clients of mine in the play. So I was there, but I was there because of a current client who had a part in the play, one of the characters. And the lead in the play was also a former client of mine when he was 5. And I just sat there just so glad to have been a part of their lives. It was very beautiful. What was your question?
That was it. What was actually, you answered both. The question was a challenging moment related to Gestalt. My next question would be a great memory. I think
that was one of the
this last, it's very interesting how they oftentimes come together. They're supposed to be 2 different questions, but they oftentimes come together.
They do. And I guess the significance of, I mean, even talking here with you is a lovely moment for me, of tying together sort of that moment with my mother, with this moment with this young child, and all the pieces in between. I really am glad I have been a Gestalt therapist, or a student and a Gestalt therapist, during a beautiful period of time. I missed Fritz Perls, but I knew his students, and they became my therapist and my mentors. And I had a chance to know them. I was at Esalen during a time of real change. I knew, you know, all the stars of Esalen, the founders of Esalen were good friends of mine, and I knew them very well. And you know, all of these different transitions in the movement of how, and I've had a chance to meet Gestalt therapists all over the world. And I've seen these changes and these developments, and all these wonderful people and who are thinking and writing and creating from different cultures all over the world. I mean, amazing. I just wish that I feel very fortunate to have that kind of broad, huge perspective. And the Cleveland Institute and their work with children and adolescents, Gordon Wheeler and Mark McConville. I mean, there's just so many people that have been so important and significant. And I think we need to acknowledge them all. And I feel truly blessed in my life as a Gestalt therapist and as a therapist to feel like many of them have been good friends, and just good teachers. Yeah.
So, kind of last question would be, what do you see for the future? What is next for you? What do you wish? What do you imagine for your future and for the future of Gestalt? What's coming up?
If anybody's hearing this that knows me well, they know I've been talking about, I want to write what I have learned over all these years through this integration of all these various disciplines in Gestalt therapy, using the metaphor of the story of Pinocchio.
Oh, wow. I saw Pinocchio. I saw the
most recent one.
It was a different version. It was an altered. I saw yesterday.
Yeah, it's the most recent one.
It was an adaptive version. They changed the story, but yeah, I love Pinocchio. I love Pinocchio.
Well, the time is right for me to write this and finally write it. My struggle is finding time to do that, because anyway, just to find the both the financial and the physical support to be able to do that. I have the story, I have to write it. I'm not like R.K. Rowling's, who can get up at 4 a.m. in the morning and sit in a coffee shop and write. It's anyway, but somehow or another I've got to do that before I leave this mortal coil, as they said last night in A Christmas Carol. So that's it. I want to do that. I want to write something, as I said. So hopefully something that adds
more than a chapter, a big book that embraces and integrates your whole
Gestalt process, the Gestalt process with children, using the story as a metaphor for this process of how we become real, how we become whole, how we become alive. I've done workshops, I've done lectures. Everybody knows about my passion and interest in Pinocchio. Even on the wall behind me somewhere, right there. I've even been to Italy, to Collodi. I've been to the village where Collodi lived to write the story. I mean, it's Carlo Lorenzini rather wrote the story. But so it's very much alive in me. What new for Gestalt, or what I hope for Gestalt, is that we own more of this integrative power, challenge and power that we have. I think for years, I hope that we will not only integrate philosophy, which we're doing, but also the neurobiology, the neuroscience.
I feel like we have, I don't know, we're in a perfect position to do so, because Gestalt does embrace a lot of what neuroscience is now explaining from a scientific point of view. We've been doing it, Gestalt has been doing it for a long time now.
Well, our fundamental roots are in neurobiology. I mean, that's what Gestalt is, a neurobiological term. It came out of Gestalt psychology. And to own that root, to own that legacy, to own and be grateful to the neurobiology and the neuroscience. But we also add this clinical work to that science, to that research, rather than recreating the wheel over there with, how we apply polyvagal theory to psychotherapy. How do we apply this over here and this over here? I've talked to Dan Siegel and others, I'll mention Dan, about this. And of course, Dan always comes back with, it's a matter of consilience. And I've always said, Dan, you are a Gestalt therapist. What you're talking about is Gestalt therapy. And he kind of, well, consilience, there are all these, the various roots of various disciplines. We all find these universal principles. But then he goes on to say that his interpersonal neurobiology is not psychotherapy. It is a study that helps us to understand what is essential for successful or for effective psychotherapy. Well, we are the psychotherapy. So I would love for us to own that with vigor. Yes, I would say with aliveness, with excitement, and move into it. Yeah. And I try to do that in my teaching and will in my writing, and to find a way to do that in a way that has integrity, and so it's a big challenge.
I share that very much, because we have such a beautiful focus on the body, and somehow the brain gets excluded from the Gestalt body. Isn't the brain part of the body as well? Exactly. Yeah, I love how much interpersonal neurobiology is a perfect fit with Gestalt.
Well, Gestalt is a perfect fit for it.
And how much Gestalt is always open for new. It's open for expansion, to building on. You talked about this throughout our time, how much you want to expand upon Gestalt. I feel like Gestalt is very open to that in many, many, many different directions, which is what attracted me in some ways.
Yeah, I think, so much of what I'm seeing in the field is a little bit of the and. It's like, if we should say, Gestalt therapy and neurobiology. No, I want it to be not and. I want it to be
integrated.
Integrated, yeah.
Isn't that also one of our buzzwords? We're going to integrate everything.
Yeah, it's greater than the sum of its parts. It's other than. It's different from the sum, or whatever. And so bringing it together is what I would like for us to do. And so anyway, so that's kind of nice.
I share a lot of that with you.
Thank you.
So before we stop, is there anything else you would like to add? Anything that came up? Anything I didn't ask? Anything you would like to share?
I think I want to just also dedicate anything I have said and everything I've said here to Violet, my friend, my colleague. She has inspired Gestalt therapy with children universally, and that can never be overshadowed or taken. We all owe a lot to Violet and to her creativity, and to others who were interested and got started working with children, like Janet Letterman and so forth. So I do want to say that, and she died. I guess it's almost been 2 years now, so I miss her. I miss her wisdom. I miss her friendship and her encouragement, which I was fortunate enough to be with her just prior to her death, and to have an intimate conversation with her about our friendship and what she had meant to me, and what we learned together and what we shared. And so I feel really blessed by that. So I can't close without a heartfelt tribute to her and her life and what she gave us and left us.
That's lovely. Okay, I'll stop right now.
Okay, thank you.